here's where we left off in class last week. So we're looking about at the changing. All right, get this pad so the mouse will work properly. We're looking about at the changing of the heaven and the earth. And what I want us to do is I want us just to let the Bible define its own terms, all right? So proper hermeneutics and proper exegesis is just letting the Bible define its own terms, letting God qualify himself, amplify himself, and magnify himself by himself. So notice in Psalm 75, he says, "When I chose the proper time, I will judge uprightly." So we know that from here God is the judge, and the earth and all its inhabitants are dissolved. What's that sound like to you?
You're going to disappear. We're going to
Yeah,
be
but is that word, so the earth and all of its inhabitants, when God judges, he says the earth, now this isn't the global earth, it's the regional earth, wherever his judgment falls. His judgment doesn't fall on the entire globe. It's always on a nation in a region. So, so the earth and all of its inhabitants are dissolved. Isn't that the same term that's used in 2 Peter 3, where the earth and the elements are dissolved with fervent heat? That's the judgment of God. But this is never talking about something that's literal. This is a regional judgment. This is judgment language, and it's not literal. Right? But if God dissolves you, you know that is bad juju. That's not good.
Right.
And this is how the prophets use language. This is the way they spoke in their time and in their culture when God judged the earth. Its inhabitants were dissolved. Look at Haggai 2, verses 6 and 7. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because when we come back to the book of Hebrews, we're going to have the same language that's used. And so if it's the same language, I want you to understand how the language had been used prior. So I'm setting you up, not in a bad way, just in a good way. I'm showing you how the language is used before we find it in the book of Hebrews. So, "For thus says the Lord God of hosts, once more," now this is actually quoted in the New Testament. "Once more, it is a little while, I will shake heaven and earth, the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and they shall come to the desire of all nations." Now, the desire of all nations is the new covenant of Jesus Christ. Because all nations were under the veil of death. I call it the death veil because of sin. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So the desire of all nations was to come out from under sin death. All right, would you agree with that? So when God shakes the nations, this is a Old Testament text with a New Testament reality. The time when God shakes the nations, they are at that time going to come to the desire of all nations. That's through the gospel, through Christ, through his blood, through his atoning work on the cross, and I will fill this temple with glory. Okay, so the temple of God is depicted here, but even though he says, "I will fill this temple with glory," this is the spiritual temple, the one that is found in the age of the desire of all nations. It's not the old covenant age that all nations would come to the temple of God. It's in the new covenant age that all the nations, through the church, right? So the church is made up of every nation, every skin color, whatever. And they're going to fill the temple of God with glory. But notice, he's going to shake the heaven and the earth up here. Now, this is not literal. He's not really talking about an earthquake here. He's talking about a change of government or a change of systems. He shakes the heaven and the earth. And when he does that, the heaven and the earth those dwelling on it will come to the desire of all nations, and the temple will be filled with the glory. That's the new covenant temple. And so, when God removes a system, he shakes heaven and earth. So when we come back to Hebrews 12, so we're jumping ahead because we're only in Hebrews 1, but notice here is the quote. In Hebrews 12 is the quote of Haggai 2 and 6. So he says, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Once more. Not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times. No. So this once more is the second coming. God is going to shake the heaven and the earth at the second coming. He's going to change systems. So notice Hebrews 12:27. Now this yet once more. So he's expounding on what's found in Haggai. It indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken. That's in the present tense. Notice the verbiage there, are being shaken. At the time that Paul, or whoever it was, wrote the book of Hebrews. I'm sorry, I'm going to have a habit of saying that Paul wrote it.
Sounds like it.
Even though I can't prove it, but I believe that he did. But anyways, you'll forgive me on that, please. So whoever wrote this at the time it was being written, there were things that were being shaken at that time. That's the old covenant Jewish world. It was growing old and it was ready to vanish away. And so he says, as of things that are made, that is, made with hands. So the temple was made by men. They built it with hands, and it was made of physical things. That the things which cannot be shaken. All right, well, what are the things that cannot be shaken? Jesus said in John 18:36, he told Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. Because if it were of this world, then my servants would fight. So the things that cannot be shaken, that's the spiritual things, the new covenant world may remain. Well, that's the kingdom that we live in today. All right, so you can feel free to speak up, or you don't have to listen to me the whole time.
Gotta soak this in.
Hebrews 12:28.
That's what I'm looking at. I already have it highlighted. That's.
Can you see it from back there?
Yep.
Okay, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken. Now notice that there. So, things which cannot be shaken, those things may remain. That's the kingdom. Well, the kingdom's spiritual. So the things that cannot be shaken are the spiritual things of the kingdom. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom, that's in the present tense, when the letter was written, which cannot be shaken, let us have grace. So they were to stay in the grace of Christ, not go back under the law. Because the law is not of grace, right? The man who does them shall live by them. So he says, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably. That's under the new covenant of grace. With reverence, I better watch it. With reverence and godly fear. And so the removal is the shaking, and the shaking is the removal. Well, what was in the process of being removed? That was Judaism. That's the old covenant kingdom being replaced by the new covenant kingdom. So, now this is very interesting. All right, Isaiah 51. We're going to read the first 16 verses, and I'm going to try my best to exegete it, because I want to grab the context and not just proof text here and there. So he says, listen to me. So he's speaking to Israel here. Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness. That would be the righteous remnant. He says, you who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn. Okay, so he's telling them, go back to your roots. Go back to the promises that I made to your father and mother, Abraham and Sarah. And he says, and the whole, of course, this is a metaphor, right? They weren't literally hewn out of a rock pile, and into the hole of the pit from which you were dug. So go back to your roots. He says, look at verse 2. Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who bore you. Okay, so did God make promises to the rest of the world through Abraham and Sarah? Right? Genesis 12 and 3. What's Genesis 12 and 3 say?
I'll make you a father of many nations.
That's right. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And I will make you and your seed a blessing to the whole world. I'm paraphrasing, but a father of many nations. So that's what we have here. For I called him alone and blessed him and increased him. That's going back to Genesis 12 and 3, the promise there. For the Lord will comfort Zion. Now, remember that this promise, blessed him and increased him, this promise is a spiritual promise. It was given prior to 430 years before the law of Moses was given at Mount Sinai. So this blessedness doesn't come through the law, but it does come by grace through faith. All right? So, he says, for the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. Well, this Zion here is spiritual. That's the new kingdom. That's not the old kingdom. He will make her wilderness like Eden. Okay, that is 1 Corinthians 15:21. For in Adam all die, but in Christ all are made alive. So what was lost in Adam, the Garden of Eden, is gained in Christ. So whenever you see a promise that includes Eden, that's a new covenant promise. All right, that's through Christ. I'm going to make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in it, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. Okay, so this is resurrection life in Christ. In Christ, I don't cry. I cry in my flesh, right? But in covenant with Christ, I don't lack anything. So I have gladness, and I have the thanksgiving and the voice of melody in my covenant with the Lord, and so do you. In verse 4, listen to me, my people. Remember, he's speaking to the righteous remnant. And give ear, O my nation, for law will proceed from me, and I will make my justice rest as a light for the peoples. That's the Jew and the Gentiles. So what is... Now, so you follow the train of thought here. What is this? For law will proceed from me. Is that the old covenant law or the new covenant law?
The gospel.
Yes, the gospel. It's got to be the new covenant law. So it's going to proceed from God in Christ, and I will make my justice, that's found in the gospel, rest as a light for the peoples. So the Gentiles look to the light of Jesus Christ and the law, the new covenant law of God. Now notice, when this happens, what we're going to deal with here is we're going to deal with time-indicated imminence. So when God makes his law and justice a rest as a light to the peoples, we're going to know that God's righteousness is near. All right? My salvation has gone forth at that point. We're going back to this. So my salvation has gone forth, and my arms will judge the peoples. Right? The gospel is judged, is the means of judgment today for all of humanity. Good morning, guys. Let me, I have where'd my charts go? Oh, there. 51, and we're looking at how the Old Testament scriptures use and define heaven and earth. So what we have here is what I believe is time-indicated imminence. When the law of God, that's the new law, comes forth, then we know that God's righteousness is near. It wasn't near when Isaiah penned these words, because Christ was over 700 years away. But when the law I will make law will proceed from me, and I will make my justice rest as a light. When that happens, now God's righteousness is near, and his salvation has gone forth. And my arms will judge the peoples. So now God is going to judge the nations, not by the law of Moses, but through the gospel, by the law of Jesus Christ. James 2, and I think it's 25, the law of liberty. So the coastlands, now that is the Gentiles, will wait upon me, and on my arm they will trust. That is, on God's strength. Look at verse 6. So he says, lift up your eyes to the heavens and look to the earth beneath. Now here's heaven and earth in the new covenant. Now watch what he says. For the heavens will vanish away like smoke. What's going on here? Well, there's a transition. God is transitioning from the old covenant to the new covenant. And remember, as he does this, he's telling them, watch what's going to happen. Look at heaven and earth. Not the literal heavens and the literal earth, but the heaven and earth of your world is now going to vanish away like smoke, and the earth will grow old like a garment. And those who dwell in it will die in like manner. That's the old covenant world being destroyed. And look, if you remain, excuse me, if they remained in that old covenant world and they refused to leave Jerusalem and the land of Judea when Rome came in, what would happen to them in 70? Yeah, they would be destroyed. So the earth will grow old like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner. But, and here's the contrast. Remember, Jesus told them, when you see the abomination of desolation, that's the Roman army surrounding Jerusalem. That was Cestius Gallus and his 5,000 troops that came into the city in 66 AD. They came right up to the temple. They could have put down the Jewish revolt, but somehow they didn't. He withdrew. So, notice he says, those who dwell in it will die in like manner. Now, Jesus said, when you see this occur, what are you to do? Are you to stay in the city? No, get out. Okay, get out. But if they stayed, those who dwell in it will die.
Now, were the gates open like only certain times? I mean, could they come and go as they pleased, or
they could up until this time, and the gates were shut on the Sabbath day. Well, let me qualify that. The gates were commanded to be shut by Nehemiah on the Sabbath day, because prior to the captivity, they opened the gates and they defiled the Sabbath day. Okay, so but after they came out of captivity under Zerubbabel and Nehemiah, when they rebuilt the city, they had promised, look, we're going to keep the gates shut. We're not going to have idols, and we're not going to conduct business on the Sabbath day, because that was against the Sabbath law. So they had the gates shut on the Sabbath day. That's why Jesus said, pray that your flight be not in winter, because it would be harder to travel. You're on foot, or you're at least on a mule or whatever, right? You're on foot, basically.
Going through what we're going through, the snow.
Yeah, and it's harder to travel.
Right.
He says, pray that you're not nursing, right? You don't have a little child, because it's harder for moms to travel, especially in the wintertime. And he says, pray that your flight be not on the Sabbath day. That's because the Sabbath day, the gates would be shut, and therefore, how are they going to get out?
Right. Yeah.
So if they stayed in the old heaven and the old earth, they would die. So here's the contrast, but my salvation will be forever. That's the salvation of the new covenant kingdom. And my righteousness will not be abolished. All right, so look what he says. Listen to me, you who know righteousness. So now he's still addressing the remnant. You people in whose heart is my law. Do not fear the reproach of men, nor be afraid of their insults. For the moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool. This sounds to me like James chapter 5. Woe to you rich. Your riches. Let's stop here. Let's go to James chapter 5. I'm going to say this is exactly James chapter 5. I'm just going to say that. So we go to the, let me get there. All right. So it is my understanding that this is James chapter 5. And if it is James chapter 5, then it is in the last days. Watch what James says. He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten." Wait a minute. Look at the text again. "For the moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool." Let's read on in James 5. In verse 3, he says, "Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure," when? "In the last days." All right. So the treasure of that old covenant world would be actually stolen from them by Rome. Okay? Rome came in and basically sacked the entire nation. They took all the gold, they took all the silver, they took everything that was of any value. And so what's happening here is, in the last days, the moth would eat them up like a garment, the worm would eat them like wool, but my righteousness will be forever. That's the righteousness of the kingdom of Messiah. And he says, "My salvation from generation to generation." Now this is very interesting to me, because forever is the first, this is a Hebrew parallelism. I want you to see something here. My righteousness will be forever. That's the first clause. Then it's repeated, but it's repeated in a different way. My salvation from generation to generation. That's Ephesians 3:21. Let me show you. So go over to Ephesians 3:21. So I'm reading out of the New King James Version. And most of my reading nowadays is from the King James, New King James, and the Legacy Standard Version. I really do like that version, but I do like the New King James as well, because that's what I was weaned on. So let's look at Ephesians 3:21. Paul says, "To him be glory in the church by Jesus Christ to all generations, forever and ever." Now the King James says world without end. I want you to see this. Look at Isaiah 51:8. My righteousness will be forever. My salvation from generation to generation. Look at the two clauses. Those are parallel. Well, Paul uses the exact same parallel. He says, "To him be glory in the church by Jesus Christ to all generations." And the King James says world without end, but the New King James says forever and ever. There's no difference. No difference. It's the same thing. I just wanted to show you that. So be looking for these Hebrew parallelisms in your studies when you read. So verse 9. He says, "Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient days. So what he's going to do is he's going to call the righteous remnant to remember what happened to them in their prior history. In the generations of old, he says, are you not the arm that cut Rahab? Now Rahab is Egypt. It is a code word for Egypt. Are you not the arm or the power, the strength that cut Rahab apart and wounded the serpent? Who was the serpent that was wounded in the Red Sea crossing? Pharaoh. Pharaoh. You wounded the serpent. Can men be serpents? Yes. Well, Bishop, how do what are you talking about? Right here. Look at the context. There is no doubt. No one will say that Rahab is not Egypt. It absolutely is Egypt. You cut Egypt apart and wounded the serpent. That was Pharaoh. That was the Egyptians. What did Jesus call in Matthew 23? What did he call that generation, the scribes and the Pharisees? You brood of vipers. What did John in Matthew 3 call the scribes and the Pharisees when they came out to him to be baptized? You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? So can men be serpents? Yes, they can. All right. How is that? I don't know. Ask God. He's the one that wrote the Bible. I didn't write the Bible. I'm just showing you that men can be serpents, and they are serpents. Mm-hmm. Just keep that in mind. All right. Keep this in mind. Okay. So I'm going to move on. He says, are you not the one who dried up the sea? What's he talking about here? What's the one great event in which the sea was dried up?
It's the crossing of the Red Sea.
The Red Sea crossing, Exodus 14. The waters of the great deep that made the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to cross over. Are you not that same God? Yes, I am. Yes, he is. This is the Red Sea crossing. This is in their history. Watch, follow this. So the ransom of the Lord shall return. So is an adverb of manner. That means after this manner or in this way. Just like the Red Sea crossing, so God will provide a way in which the ransom of the Lord shall return to him. And come to Zion with singing. This is the new Zion, by the way. This is the spiritual Jerusalem. Come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy in their heads, and they shall obtain joy and gladness. So here's the transition. Just like in the old covenant, God brought you out. So in the new covenant, God will make a way to bring you out of Egypt a second time. This is talking about the second Exodus. And you'll come to Zion here. That's the spiritual Zion. He says, sorrow and singing will flee away. That is always connected with resurrection. All right. Sorrow and singing will flee away. That is Isaiah 25 and verse 8. No more tears. So that is a resurrection verse, if you're interested in that. So notice, even I, am he who comforts you. Who are you that you should be afraid of man who will die, and of the Son of Man who will be made like grass? Now that sounds like Peter. This has all kinds of New Testament connotations. Let's go over to 1 Peter. 1 Peter. It's a great book. And chapter 1. And we'll look at verses 24 and 25. So man is the grass. So in 1 Peter 1:24, Peter says, all flesh is as grass. And all the glory of man as the flower of the grass withers. What does that mean? That means man will die. And the flower falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. So this is Peter, right? So we have an echo here. We call it an echo or an illusion. So the Son of Man who will be made like grass. Because man dies just like the grass. And you forget the Lord, your maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundation of the earth. Now that's true of the physical world, but it's also true of the covenant world. So you have feared continually every day because of the fury of the oppressor. In other words, they were fearing the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Medo-Persians, and the Greeks, when he has prepared to destroy. And where is the fury of the oppressor? God brought these nations. The Assyrians fell to Babylon. Babylon fell to the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians fell to Greece. Greece fell to Rome. Now, verse 14. The captive exile hastens, that he may be loosed. Where were they captive? Egypt. Okay, they desired to be free, that he should not die in the pit. The pit is Egypt, what he's referencing. And that his bread should not fail. But I am the Lord your God, who divided the sea. So he's still talking about the Exodus, the Red Sea crossing. So what I'm saying is that the captive exile hastens. They wanted to get out of Egyptian bondage. They didn't want to die in the pit. The pit is Egypt. Now, so he says here, I'm the one who divided the sea whose waves roar. He goes back to the Red Sea crossing. The Lord of hosts is his name. And so what was the next thing that God did when he brought them out of Egypt? Where did they go? To the foot of what? Mount Sinai. So watch this. And I have put my words in your mouth. When did that happen? Exodus 19 and 20. God brought them to the foot of the mountain. He gave Moses the very words. And he put the words in their mouth. This is the old covenant. Then he says, I have covered you with the shadow of my hand. What does that mean? You're protecting your children, right? Any good parent, if there's projectiles or someone's trying to attack you, you get in the way and you cover the child with the shadow of your hand. Why? So what did God do in giving them the law and protecting them, covering them with the shadow of his hand? What was he doing? Look at this. He was planting the heavens, and he was laying the foundation of the earth. In this act, in bringing them to Mount Sinai, they came out of Egypt. He put the words in their mouth. Give me a second.
The new covenant.
I forget where it was. He actually said, I have put my words in your mouth. And it's in Deuteronomy. So in Deuteronomy 30, starting at verse 11, you're going to see that God put his words in their mouth. He says, for this commandment which I commanded you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far off. It is not written in heaven that you should say, who will ascend to the heaven for us to bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? Nor is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? But the word is very near you, in your mouth, do you see that? And in your heart, that you may do it. There it is. That's what I was looking for. So God, in the old covenant, put his words in their mouth and in their heart. Now, so notice this. I apologize. I should have had, put that in here. I have put my words in your mouth. That's Deuteronomy 30. I have covered you with the shadow of my hand. This is all old covenant under the law of Moses. Why? Why did God do this? That I may plant the heavens. Well, wait a minute. God already created the world. He already made the heaven and the earth in Genesis 1, right? So, what is this talking about? God gave them the old covenant in order to plant the heavens, to lay the foundations of the earth, and to say to Zion, you are my people. The heaven and earth here is covenant. It is not the literal heaven and earth. God created the literal heaven and earth in Genesis 1, and he, here again, when he brings them to Mount Sinai and gives them his covenant, he says that I may plant the heavens and lay the foundations of the earth. Heaven and earth is covenantal language. Not always, but a lot of the time, heaven and earth is covenantal language. Okay, so that's it. So let's go back let me take a couple of minutes. So when we go back to Hebrews chapter 1, and we find that Hebrews chapter 1 is a quotation of Psalms 102. Psalms 102 is not the literal heaven and the earth. No. The heaven and earth of Psalms 102 is covenant. That's what it is. Covenant. That God would change the covenants. And so he says in Hebrews 1 and verse 10, the Lord in the beginning, now this is not the beginning of time, it's the beginning of the covenant that we just read in Isaiah 51. In the beginning, he laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of his hands. Now look at verse 11, they will perish, but you will remain. So the heaven and earth will perish. Why? Because there would come a time in which the old covenant would be done away. That's the old heaven and earth of Isaiah 51. They will grow old like a garment. That is Hebrews 8 and verse 13. Hebrews 8:13. Now look at Hebrews 1 and 12. Like a cloak, you will fold them up, and they will be changed. Not burnt up. No. This is the changing of the covenants. This is not the destruction of the periodic table. Now, many of the futurists would say, oh, no, this is talking about the destruction of earth. No. It's talking about the destruction of the old covenant world, and it would be changed. That's how it's destroyed. It's changed. All right? So we have a change from one covenant to another covenant. And so, as God brought them to Mount Sinai, he put his words in their mouth. He covered them with the shadow of his hands in order that he might plant the heavens and lay the foundations of the earth. What heaven and earth is that? That's the heaven and earth of the old covenant world. And that's exactly the heaven and earth that is in transition in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12, which is a quotation from Psalms 102, 26 and 27, or 25 through 27. And so, as we look at this, remember the earth was dissolved, right, when God's judgment came. It's the same thing here. This is not talking about the destruction of the literal global heavens and earth. It's the Jewish heaven and the Jewish earth that is going to be destroyed. How? It's going to be changed. You're changing covenants from one covenant to another covenant. So this change is also about the throne of God. So in the old covenant we had the throne of David, right? In the new covenant we have the throne of Christ. When you go back to Hebrews 1 and 8, he says, but to the Son he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. So we're talking about the changing of the thrones, going from the throne of David, a literal king, in the physical Zion, to a spiritual king in the heavenly Zion. It's the throne, but it's the Son's throne. And then, regarding the Son's throne, he says, you, O Lord, in the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. Why? The old covenant world is going to be done away with, but the throne of God in the new covenant world is now that of Christ, and he will remain a king, a priest, and a prophet forever and ever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so the way that heaven and earth is used is not literal. It's covenantal. This is covenantal, heaven and earth. They had their own heaven and earth. It was their covenant. It was their system. It was their government. And when that government was changed, when it was brought down, their heavens and their earth were destroyed. It was changed over. So the writer of the book of Hebrews is saying, look, there's a change that is coming. And it concerns the throne. It concerns the heaven and the earth of the old covenant world. And it is going to change from that old covenant heaven and earth to the new heavens and the new earth of the new covenant. And that's what we're dealing with. Okay, so any other thoughts or questions? I know we took the long cut, not a shortcut, but a long cut. And I did this because I want you to see what is being spoken of in the book of Hebrews. So this is an advanced class. We're not just going to float on the surface like a canoe or a submarine. We're going to go down deep. We're going to look at all of these things in their context and see how the prophets use these terms. Okay. Any questions? All right, thank you.